I think Bruce covered quite a bit about the context, the backdrop. So I lead up the data and AI services practice for Kyndryl. And as Bruce mentioned, Kyndryl is the largest IT infrastructure services provider. We are serving close to around 4,500 clients globally. And we have essentially, a huge focus around ESG and commitment to sustainability as such, right? So we're looking at 2040 for being net zero from a greenhouse gas emission standpoint. But even as we march towards that goal, all of the data centers that we run, close to around 20, 30 data centers globally, we're looking at how do we source the electricity from renewable sources, right? And how do we bring down the PUE of our data centers? How do we run our data centers more efficiently from a carbon footprint standpoint? And not only that, but also being able to do advisory, consulting kind of services for our clients globally to help them reduce their carbon footprint around their IT operations. Whether that is with mission critical workloads, of course, with things like generative AI coming in, you can imagine the amount of resource consumption that some of these large language models sort of incur when you run those kind of workloads. Right? So how do we help them do this more efficiently with less compute and less resource consumption, whether that's on the cloud, whether that's off cloud, any of that. Right? There's obviously from an overall ESG standpoint, we're also looking at how do we sort of bring in diversity, inclusion, equity into our human capital strategy, and also sort of looking at how do we sort of engage broadly in the space with our clients. Now, one of the client examples that I want to talk about, and I don't have the slides here, but I'll maybe try and help you sort of get the context or the gist of it. So this was a food processing CPG kind of a client, very large major in that industry. They operate around 30,000 hectares of palm plants, farms for various fruit produce that they generate out of that, 300 plus farms. And essentially, one of the challenges that they were looking at was obviously from a yield optimization standpoint, but also looking at how do they reduce all of the organic waste going to landfill versus being consumed within the farm for circularity purposes and all of that. Right? They had a lot of plant survey data. They had a lot of drone data, running into 300 terabytes plus, and a lot of other weather data and all of that. It basically helps you run your farms more optimally, right? Whether it's in the context of water efficiency, water stewardship, yield maximization, various different parameters. And what we did there was we started looking at all of this and then said, let's first ensure they have the right data platform. Because unless you're able to ingest all of this data, bring it all together at a place where it's aggregated, where it can be synthesized, harmonized, and then used for driving insights, you cannot actually get into all of this. Just one more. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So essentially, we look at the data architecture here. All of the data sources, how do we synthesize it, organize it, and then bring it all together in a place where it can sort of look at what insights can be generated, whether it's in the context of, like I said, yield maximization, whether it's in the context of looking at water efficiency on the farms and all. Right? We also use the Azure cloud architecture for the data platform. We also use open source technologies like Apache, Sedona, because that was required for capturing all of this geospatial data, the maps, the drone data, and all of that. And with that, we are able to generate all of these insights using the various Azure services. So one such example of how we're looking at driving to better productivity, better outcomes, bringing in circularity into the mix, and deploying a lot of data and AI technologies in the mix for making all of this happen. The next slide, please. So, as I think Ian and Jules also covered, I think a big part of how we engage in this space of sustainability, I think, is that it's not essential that we work with clients alone. I think it's important that we work with the entire ecosystem, whether that is communities, whether it's academia, whether it's the government, because as they say, it takes a village to raise a child, right? And it's something very similar in the context of ESG and sustainability. That if we have to get that network effect, if we have to get that maximized outcome, I think it becomes essential that we as enterprises and even as individuals look at how do we sort of co-opt the ecosystem, work with, work intentionally towards, driving to, specific outcomes, specific problems that we can solve. I think the plastic fisher example that Ian talked about. So we ran this hackathon with Reva University, and this was around 1,000 plus participants globally, around 700 plus teams that came together on this hackathon. And essentially, it was to detect plastic waste from getting regenerated from rivers and going into oceans. And with that hackathon, what we've been able to do is harvest an asset, which is a broader waste management asset that can do, you can identify clusters of waste, you can segregate them, you can geotag them, and then you can drive to actions where you can basically trigger alerts for waste removal, what can be segregated as recyclable waste versus non-recyclable waste. We're already working with one of the government agencies here in Karnataka, one of the districts here, to look at making that district plastic-free zone. Right? And all of this essentially came out of the collaboration that we started with one of the startups, Plastic Fisher. In fact, one of the summits, TIA summits, was where some of this all came together. And then we sort of got into a point where we now have a solution prototype that we are engaging with government on. So the point really is, if you have to get to a purpose economy, I think it becomes so critical that we work together as an ecosystem, create this value, and do it with a sense of urgency. We do not want this situation that we have in Bangalore today with the water crisis, sort of cascading and having the domino effect and then becoming a much larger problem than what we have today. So I think we are all in this together, and hopefully we can find reasons and ways to collaborate and create this value